Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to the Global Networking Show. And it's the nightmare before Christmas. It's our final episode of the year, a couple of days before Christmas Day. And we thought we'd have a bit of fun today on the Global Networking Show. So we thought we would share some networking nightmares, yours, our own, and a range of experiences of some of the strangest people we've met at networking events. I'm Andy Lopata, and I'm delighted to be co-hosting the show today. We're joined, first of all, I want to introduce Inga Dexnay. Inga is the producer of the show and is now going to tell you how you can get involved as well.
Hi everyone. Please send your comments or your stories to our Google Hangout account, so you can post your comments underneath the show, or you can post them on our Facebook page, GNS Show, and you can tweet at us using hashtag GNetShow. And we have first question already, and Tatiana asks, what part of the country are you from, and where do you do most of your business networking?
That's an interesting question. Thanks, Tatiana, because being the Global Networking Show, we're from all over. So I'm based just outside London. Because of the nature of my role, a lot of my networking is now done, when it's done at formal events, is now done at events at which I'm speaking, and they can be anywhere, either in the UK or overseas. I do belong to some local networks near to where I live in Hertfordshire, as well as a women's network, believe it or not, or a network for people who work with women's networks in corporates. But most of my networking now is done with people who are in my network. So rather than at formal events, it's lunch meetings, one-to-one meetings, catch up over a coffee, getting to know people on a more personal basis. So thank you for that, Tatiana. I'll hand that question now over to our co-presenter, Ivan Misner, who's based over the pond. So Ivan, where do you do most of your networking, as if we can't guess?
Hi, Andy. Listen, that's a great question. Today I'm in Southern California near BNI headquarters, and we're of an organization called BNI, and we have operations in almost 60 countries around the world. So I do my networking, literally around the world. I'm on the road about 26 weeks a year, traveling and visiting BNI Groups and Referral Institute, where I'm also the co-founder or the founder of the Referral Institute. So both of those organizations keep me networking around the world. And we'll have Tim here tell us where. Let me introduce Tim. Tim is our special guest today. And by the way, the Nightmare Before Christmas, I love that title, Andy. That's Andy's title, everyone, and I think that was a very creative title. So Tim Houston is the author of a book called The World's Worst Networker. The World's Worst Networker was #1 book on Amazon for quite some time. He's an accomplished public speaker and trainer. He has trained thousands and thousands of people around the world, and I've had the opportunity to share the stage with Tim. Tim is, as I said, the author of The World's Worst Networker. Tim, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, folks.
Tell us where you're at, Tim.
So where am I? I'm in New York City right now, and like Ivan, I've been affiliated with BNI now coming on to 19 years. It'll be 19 years in February of 2015. And so I do my networking predominantly within BNI chapters in my region, and outside of BNI, the outside of BNI life, a lot of other local networking groups, some national conferences that I speak at, that I train at, also some internal networking taking place in another area of my life, which is now that I have a 2-year-old daughter, I seem to be doing a lot more business networking, believe it or not, with parents of kids of the same age. So it runs the spectrum.
A lot more networking, Tim, but a lot less sleep.
That's true. Very true.
Hey, Tim, let me get things rolling and ask you a question. So you wrote a book, The World's Worst Networker. I contributed to that book. It's a great book. Everyone, if you have a chance, make sure and take a look at it. Share with us one of your favorite stories of the worst, one of the best of the worst you can think of.
One of the best of the worst. I would have to say it's actually one that's happened after I published the book. That didn't make this book. And it's what I call the pillar of society. I've nicknamed this guy the pillar of society. These are the types of people that have been in business longer than the cavemen have been around since we came out of caves. They have sometimes more credentials and initials after their names than there are letters of the alphabet. And they...
Hey, be careful there.
Hey, I know. You only have a few after your name. But these people, they come to networking events and they make it seem as though that you should be grateful that you are in their presence. And they come with what I call the mercenary mentality. It's all about them. It's all about what they can get from the event. It's never about the other people that are there. And I just had an experience not too long ago, a few weeks ago, with one of these types of people. I was at a networking function. It was an informal networking function, and this person just went on about how great he is and how long his company's been around and that he's on the board of directors for this organization and he supports this charity. It's pretty much the spotlight was turned on him. It was look at me, look at me. Conversely, we had some folks that are in the room that were in the same type of profession that didn't have the same level of expertise or the same level of experience or the accolades that this person had, but had a better kind of attitude, a how can I help you kind of attitude. And people tended to gravitate more so to those folks, myself included, as opposed to the braggart that was there. So that was one of the I would say one of the world's worst networkers. That I probably put in the sequel, if there is going to be a sequel to The World's Worst Networker. That person will definitely be in one of my top 10.
I think one of the key things you have to do when you network is you've got to keep your powder dry, haven't you? And I always talk about what do you do as the worst question possible at a networking event, because we get into this whole transactional conversation straight away. I don't want anyone asking me what I do till they're actually interested. And exactly the same with the guy you met, Tim. No one was interested because they hadn't invested in him yet, and he hadn't invested in them. There was no relationship there that said, well, actually, I care about your achievements. Get to know people first before you start grandstanding and telling them how wonderful you are. Let them find out.
There's a really good technique that I heard while I was working on the gender book that I did with Frank Raffley and Hazel. One book is about the difference between men and women and how they network. And it was actually a couple of women that I was talking to, and they were talking about, you mentioned transactional, Andy. They were talking about how men tend to be very transactional. Hi, my name's Ivan. What do you do? And women tend to be a little more relational. And there's a question that they shared with me that I think is a great opening question. It's and when I first heard this, by the way, here's the question. So how did you hear about tonight's event? Now, when I first heard that, I was like, really? What's that have to do with networking? But the truth is, it has everything to do with networking, because it's about building that connection. It's a more relational question than it is a transactional question. And so I really like that as a way of opening up a dialogue with somebody rather than getting going right for the kill and right for the business.
Well, the reason that that's so successful as well, it's more than just being relational. It's the fact that you've got it in common. You share the event in common. So saying how did you find out about tonight's event? You're starting a conversation that that they can engage with. When you say what do you do, if they come back with something that you're not interested in, you're in a conversational cul-de-sac. So I think that's a big reason that's a difference as well. And I think those opening questions, those opening lines can lead to a lot of those nightmares, a lot of those stilted conversations that we have where you think, how did I get myself here, and how do I do a three-point turn and get out very quickly as well. Inga, Inga mentioned earlier we want you to share your networking nightmares as well, and I think that we had one earlier today that probably fits quite nicely with this in terms of when you approach people for the first time. So, Inga, can you share what Susan Mumford shared earlier on Facebook?
Sure, yes. Susan wrote, I will never forget being at a London networking event, watching a man handing out business cards, like playing cards. As he wasn't interested in relationships, his card was recycled as soon as I returned to the office.
Yeah, I think I was quite possibly at the same event. And if it's the same person, I share this story in a lot of my talks. It was quite amazing. There were 500 people there. In our case, there were four 4 or 5 of us talking in a circle, and this guy came and joined us, and he gave us each one of his cards. But the most amazing thing wasn't that. It was what he did next. He walked away. And he just dumped a card on each of us and walked away and proceeded to work the room that way.
Yeah.
And the most beautiful moment was when he realized that what he was doing wasn't working, and he changed his behavior. And what he did was he stood by the door where people were still coming in, and as they came in, he gave them each a card. It was just phenomenal. And I don't know if Susan's thinking of the same guy, but it was quite something to see. Did you have people like that in your book, Tim?
I have had, yes, as a matter of fact, he's on the most unwanted list, and one of my contributing authors. We call him Card Guy, but I'm gonna take that a step further. Have you ever had someone approach you, hand you their business card, and when you've realized that you weren't interested, take it back from you, and then walk across the room to give it to somebody else?
No, I haven't seen that.
I've actually seen that happen once or twice, and it was just amazing. I actually had someone come over to me after they read The World's Worst Networker, and they shared an experience with me that the person not only had one card left that they were giving to the person they were speaking to, but when they saw someone else walk into the room that they perceived to be more important, they literally took the card back and walked it over to introduce themselves to that individual.
This guy that dished out the cards, I use him at the start of a lot of my talks, and I walk in and I go up to people and say, "Hi, I'm Andy, let me give you my card," and I walk on. And I've introduced something new recently to that, where I normally do that to 3 people, but I now do it to 4, but the third person, I look at them, I go to do it, and then I say, "Oh, you're not relevant to me," and I walk off. And I did this in a talk last Tuesday, and in the break, my client said, "The woman you said, 'Oh, you're not relevant to me,' said, she's the one paying your invoice tomorrow."
That's funny. Yeah, I walked into a networking event once, and there was a woman talking about collecting cards and ad cards, and I asked her, about her business, and we were talking, and she mentioned that she's really good at networking. When I told her that I ran a network, she said, "I'm really, really good at networking." I said, "Really? So tell me, what is it that you do that's so good?" She said, "Well, okay, so my partner and I, we go to networking events, and what we do is we split the room in half, and I take this half of the room, and then we go around, we give out our cards, but most importantly, we collect cards. We try to get as many cards as possible." I said, "Okay, then what?" She said, "Well, then we meet up at the end of the event, and whoever's got the thicker stack of cards, whoever has more cards, wins." And I said, "Okay, wins what?" "Well, everyone has to take them out to lunch." I said, "Okay, what do you do with all the cards?" She said, "Well, that's the best. Put them all together, then we put them in our database and we start emailing them." I said, "So you feel you're really good at networking because you collect cards, you put them in your database, and then you start to spam them." She said, "Well, we don't call it spam." Really? People amaze me sometimes, gentlemen.
Business cards is a really interesting area, because what I'm coming across more and more recently is the flip side of that, the total reverse. So many people I meet now are saying, "Well, I don't carry cards," and they're presenting it as a badge of honor. That, well, actually, and I can understand to a point where they're coming from, because they've met people like this woman Ivan, and they've been spammed as a result, and they want to be more selective who they give their card to and so forth. But I made a couple of points. The first one is that I was talking to someone last week who said the same thing to me, and I said, "Well, maybe can I make a couple of suggestions?" I said, first of all, I said, if I have just promised to do something for you, in this conversation, I want a record of that. I'm going straight out after this conversation. That night I was going to a concert. I said, "I'm going straight out from here. When I sit at my desk tomorrow and I want to recall what I promised, I want a record of that. If you give me your card, I can write on that." And it gives me that record. And she said, well, you could, you can use the back of your card or something like that. And I said, here's the other problem. You're assuming the other person has the card, and you're saying, "I'm better than you. I don't need a card because you'll have one." And it's almost like positioning yourself in a different way. So I think there's that balance to be struck, because you can be an awful networker because you're just collecting and dishing out cards, and you can be an awful networker because you don't have any with you in the first place deliberately, and I just think that's wrong.
Yeah, listen, both ends of the spectrum are problematic. The person who's just passing out their card like crazy and the person who doesn't carry their cards, both are problems. So we've talked a lot about cards, Tim. Tell us another story out of the world's worst networker that you think is a really good example of how not to network.
Well, it's so apropos for the holiday season. We're in what I consider prime time networking season right now, going to holiday parties. We're going to be seeing family members over this time. And I encounter this a lot. I'm seeing more and more of this in what I call the outsourced networkers in the book. And what these are basically are people who come to networking events because they're told they must go by their company or by their boss. They have no intention of being there. They really don't want to be there. They're usually socializing by the food or the drink for the most part. And they just kind of go through the motions. And we talk about, in the world's worst networker, I actually gave a story about a bank manager who thought that it was going to be so effective if they kept sending a different representative of their bank to every networking event. In reality, what the perception was that because no one had a chance to get to know who these people were, they thought there was a big turnover in the employment of the bank, and it just totally destroyed their credibility as a company, let alone as a branch. That particular branch of the bank. So you cannot network by proxy, as I like to tell people. It requires you to be there and to have that experience. Even if you may seem to be introverted or you may be the best extrovert in the world out there, you still have to do it. You can't outsource it to somebody else.
Yeah, a couple of examples to back that up. Sorry.
Go ahead. No.
A couple of examples to back that up then. When I started out, I was involved with a competitor organisation to BNI, and we had in one of our groups, one of the banks sent 12 different people in 12 weeks. And the point I made to them is, you're just taking, because how can any one of those people get to know the other members of the group? You're promoting your brand every week, but you're not listening to the others and getting to know them. And it was a staggering example of something you see on a less major scale on a more regular basis. But you were talking about people just sent by their boss, and a story I tell in Recommended was of two young people who were at an event that I was at for the events community in London, and they were very, very drunk, visibly very drunk at this event. And they were the type of people that you steer a wide berth clear of when you're at that event. You can see you do not want to interact with them. And I was drawn reluctantly into conversation with them. So I said to them, I said, why are you at the event? And they said, we don't know. I said, our boss told us to come. And I found out what they did, and they worked for a charity. And they said to me, what's the point of us being here? What's the purpose of a charity being here? Everyone here's from the events community. They hadn't even thought that they could build relationships with meeting planners and providers to the events community who could get those events to have a registered charity and raise money for them. Their boss hadn't told them that was the purpose. They didn't know their purpose. Therefore, their purpose was, my God, there's free booze. I'm young. I'm on a low wage, and there's free booze here. And they just enjoyed it. And they did a lot of damage to their reputations purely because their boss hadn't guided them effectively.
So you're both talking about holiday parties. So I have a question for both of you. What is a good question or a question that you like that you can use at a holiday party to get somebody to open up and talk a little bit about themselves? One of the things that I like to ask, sort of business related, is what are some of your big goals? What do you want to accomplish in 2015? Have you thought about where you want to be next year? That's a good question, a business related question that gets them thinking and opening up. What do you guys use?
Tim?
Good question. Sometimes what I'll ask in situations like that, similar to, what is your goal? Especially around the holiday time, I said, what's on your wish list? If there's one wish list, if there's one thing that Santa could deliver to you for your business, just one thing, what would it be? And then I'd follow up by asking, so what would that mean for you, or what would that mean for your business? To get them talking more and us listening.
Yeah, okay. I tend not to go in with such an approach. I tend to treat every conversation individually, and my approach just tends to be to find the common ground, and then I'll take it wherever it may be. So yeah, I might ask at this time of year, what are you doing over Christmas? Because everyone asks that. Being British, I'll probably talk about the weather at some point, or traffic. That's in our DNA. We do that. But around the summer, you'll ask around holidays, I guess. There are those questions that we will ask conversationally, but I don't go in with any planned questions. The only planned question I ever go in with is that initial opening, which tends to be along the lines of "Do you come here often?" but without using those actual words. Then I see where the conversation pans out. So it's a slightly different approach.
I think it's definitely a good idea to go with the flow on a conversation, but I think it's also good to have a few questions so that if you want to continue a conversation with somebody, but you kind of hit a lull, to ask have a question or two. One that I use around the holidays that's more personal is what's the best gift you've ever given, or what's the best gift you've ever received, and it really gives people you think, and some of the answers are really creative and fun.
I think the key with it, Ivan, is that it needs to be natural. And we talk about where people struggle in networking. You and I know that there are books that offer a list of questions to ask people at networking events, and if you go in prepared with those, you sound like someone who's read a book with a list of questions to ask people at networking events. Has to be natural, and the key is that you have your ears open at all times, so you only use it if, as you say, the conversation's hitting a bit of a dead end and you need something to liven it up a bit. Inga, have we got any more networking nightmares out there?
Yes, we have story from Andrew, and he says that a lady named Ethel pushed in between me and a friend whilst we were in deep conversation, and with her back to me, grabbed his name badge, showed a card in his hand, and said, "We haven't met yet," and proceeded to lecture him on the subject of her business.
So she actually physically barged her way into the conversation.
Yeah.
Tim, have you witnessed that before? I know I have.
I've witnessed so many times people just getting into, a private conversation between two people, maybe even three people. And, I know Ivan talks about it. I think it was in Networking Like a Pro. I think he dedicated a whole chapter to the way people sit and stand in position and having a conversation. And I think that would, that's a good reference that people should know, that you just don't run over there and barge into a conversation and hand people your business card and take over the conversation.
Yeah, and I saw, Ivan, you were nodding wildly there as well.
Yeah, I talk about in Networking Like a Pro, opens and the way to stand. I don't talk about barging in and interrupting a conversation, which to me is, just good manners 101. That's amazing to me that people do that, but I have seen it, absolutely.
And I've had it done to me, and I know how it made me feel. So I was talking to a speaker from South Africa. I was meeting at a speakers convention. I've met him for the first time, and someone who we both know, and I knew quite well, just walked up, and while I was mid-sentence, stood in front of me. He said, "Justin, how are you?" Ignored me completely. And it just it actually changed the whole relationship between me and this guy. I couldn't respect him in the same way again. I think you have to be very aware of people around you and how you make them feel.
Yeah, very true.
How about, we've talked a lot about networking events. We've got about 5 minutes left. What about online networking? Because there's a hell of a lot of I'm trying to think how to phrase this. It's a new world, and people don't necessarily know what the etiquette is initially. There's perhaps a lot more scope to make mistakes, let's put it that way. So what mistakes have you seen people make, the worst nightmares you've seen in the online world?
Back when the book was published in 2011, I called the entire an entire section called the Online Outlaws, because these are people, and they still exist to this day, 4 years later, that behave one way in person and a totally different way online. And you have to be congruent, because people could, they could smell a fraud a mile away or a kilometer away. And, you just can't have this one type of persona online, and then when people meet you,
Yeah.
Their expectation is to be exactly that online, and you're something totally, totally different. So I believe it destroys your credibility. But, you know, I mean, the basic etiquette, as most people would know, is that Facebook is, if you're using that as your venue, that's more for social stuff. You don't talk about your favorite movie on LinkedIn. Twitter, you know, you just keep it very, very short. You know, and you probably link to an article or a video or something that you do, but it's not, there's a time and place, and I think more people have to learn the etiquette that's involved with all the online social networks. If they're not sure, they could just ask. You know, they could ask people.
I think as well you have to be aware of the technology and not being overtaken by the technology. I had a LinkedIn request from someone I didn't know last week, and if I get a LinkedIn request from someone I don't know, I will always write back to them. 99.9% of them, there's no personalizing the invitation, so I'll write back to them and ask them a bit about why they want to connect. And this guy came back and he spent about 4 paragraphs talking about the business he was launching. And I replied and I said, I wish you all the best with that, but tell me, why is that relevant to me, or why am I relevant to that? And he came back and he said, he went in a bit more about, oh, if I could, you know, if I'm interested in the business, then great, and so on. And I said, I went back and I gave him a tip. I said, allow me to be so bold. Show an interest in other people first. Build the relationship first before you force the business on them. And he came back and he said, oh yes, he said, thank you for the tip about building relationships. He said, I have a tool to do that, but I didn't feel I wanted to do that with you straight away. And I just said to him, the best tool for building relationships is your empathy, your curiosity, and your ears. But for him, it was technology, and I just thought it was such a shame, missed opportunity. Ivan, you must have seen a few interesting examples.
I've seen a lot. You know, the whole concept of VCP, visibility, credibility, profitability, applies online as well as face-to-face. You've got to establish credibility before you start trying to do business. And premature solicitation, asking for business before there's a relationship, happens online, but it happens at light speed. More and more online than even face-to-face, because it's less personal. It's easier to, you know, send a business request on digitally than it is to stand face-to-face with somebody. So I think it happens a great deal. I actually, usually when someone does that, I send them a link to an article that I wrote about premature solicitation, about someone who just asked for business before there was a relationship. I would guess 75% of the time I don't get any response back. They don't, you know, they no longer try to connect. They don't apologize. They don't say anything. They just, you know, I was not interested, so they moved on. But every now and then someone will get back to me and say, you know, I'm really glad you sent that. I hadn't thought that through. So for that 20-25% that actually read it, I sent them an article that I wrote on it.
It's become a numbers game for some people, hasn't it? That's not networking, that's marketing, and pretty poor marketing at that, or bad sales.
You're right. It's basically cold calling.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to finish off, I've had an email from one of the show's multiple contributors, I believe. We've had Susan Rowan on a couple of times, and Susan's also contributed to your book, Tim, as well, I understand. And Susan saw the show was coming up and dropped me an email to say she has a meeting now. She's going to watch back on YouTube, but wish us all the best and a happy Hanukkah and happy Christmas to everyone. But she sent a couple of stories, one of which was in Tim's book, and the second one, I think, it's quite nice to bring it to a close with this topic, because we talked a lot about premature solicitation. Well, what happens at the other end of the relationship? So Susan said, I heard from the mother of one of the 2 cousins who stopped talking because one recommended the other an investment client of bongo bucks. The recipient cousin never even picked up the phone to say thank you, much less give a cousin and wife to dinner. I'm not quite sure what bongo bucks are, but it obviously didn't go down very well. Those who don't appropriately acknowledge and appreciate that which has been given lose friendships, family, and reputations. And they give people like us material for books, talks, blogs, and tweets. So not saying thank you, I think, must be one of the biggest nightmares out there.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. But, you know, it's kind of funny. I was having a discussion about this with a colleague the other day. He says no one says thank you. No one says, it seems like there's just an expectation that people are expected to do business with each other or to refer to one another, and they just take the relationship for granted. And it just leaves a sour taste in your mouth when you meet people like that. Always remember the basic stuff that we learned even before we were in kindergarten. Please and thank you. This is what I train people to do, even all over the world. It's just amazing. I don't think it necessarily is endemic just to one type of culture.
Yeah, thank you is an important touch point for people do something for you, even if it's just an email saying, "Hey, I really appreciate what you did." That kind of thing is extremely important. Although I've got one person who is just amazing. He always sends a handwritten personal note through the mail. Does it consistently. He's been doing it for 10 years because I've been doing business with this guy for a long time. And every few months I get a handwritten personal note. I wish I was that good. He is really amazing.
It's fantastic when you do it right. And I know that some people might look at this show. It's been slightly different to our normal approach. I thought we'd have a bit of fun with it. Some people might look at this and say, well, we're being a bit bitchy and moaning. And I hope we can see this in the right spirit and the right light, that you can look at what people do wrong and you can learn from it. And we, a lot of us improve based on what we see we don't like and we don't want to be seen like. So take the positive from this. We should say thank you to Susan for sending that in, because I'd hate for her to get upset, and to Susan and to Andrew and for Tatiana for their contributions as well. It's been fun. It's been interesting, and hopefully it's been a learning experience as well.
And Tim, I think you're going to have a special that's going to be put up on our Facebook page. Is that correct?
That is correct. It'll be on the Facebook page. I'll send it out. It's only for listeners and watchers of the Global Networking Show.
So we'll put that on the
Facebook page, and you'll see our special. Sorry, Andy, we're going to say something.
I was going to say we'll put it on the Facebook page. I think, Tim, if you can pop it on the Facebook and Google Hangout pages, and I'll lift it from there and put it onto the YouTube description as well, so people who are watching on YouTube can access it from certainly over the next few days.
Sure, I appreciate it.
Inga, thank you very much for helping with the show again. We appreciate you. For everyone listening, if you'd like to get more information on the Global Networking Show, you can go to globalnetworkingshow.com. That's globalnetworkingshow.com. Andy, my co-host, thank you for today's topic. Love the topic. Tim, it was great having you as a guest.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, folks.
I have a suggestion that we can continue fun on our Facebook page, the Global Networking Show, and you're very welcome to share your stories, and it would be interesting to read about your experience.
Please do. Please tell us about all your own networking nightmares, but we hope that you have a pleasant, dream-filled Christmas and a very happy New Year. We'll see you on the Global Networking Show in 2015. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.